He was already signaling for me to get off the main lane before I even reached the official way station on I-35. The reflective vest looked legitimate from a distance, but there were no marked police cars nearby, nor an active radio on his shoulder. The makeshift sign behind read "Secondary Inspection," pointing to a dimly lit side area that I had never seen operating there. My dashboard still showed normal flow, and no prior hold warning appeared in the ELD at that time. When he said my code had been selected for immediate seizure, I knew something wasn't adding up. I was driving south on I-35, carrying a sealed load of industrial equipment from Wichita, scheduled for delivery to San Antonio before the end of the morning. The schedule was adjusted, but within the allowed hours, and my ELD showed sufficient margin to complete without violation. Dry weather, clear skies, light crosswind typical of that central Texas region during the early morning hours. The cabin was organized, the coffee was still warm in the holder, and physical documents were separated in case of a routine inspection. Nothing in the system indicated special retention or advanced pre-selection. I had already passed through that way station dozens of times over the years on the road. Old structure, centrally located main scale, strong lighting over the official lane, and fixed cameras visible at the top. The normal procedure is simple. You weigh the item, wait for the signal on the overhead panel, and follow the electronic instructions. State agents are usually located near the main entrance, always identifiable, and with a marked vehicle parked nearby. That morning, the main area appeared to be operating normally, but the side area was darker than usual. My shipment had its seal intact, the tracking number noted in my notebook, and the digital record in the carrier's app. I had passed inspection 2 days prior in Oklahoma. Everything was in order with no outstanding issues. Brakes serviced the previous week, tires properly inflated, tank almost full, and no warning lights on the dashboard. There was no operational justification for a preventive detention at that specific point on the route. Even so, he acted as if my truck had been marked from the start. The shift was shortly after 2 in the morning, a time when the staff is usually reduced but not non-existent. You'll usually still see at least one clearly marked police car and 2 officers patrolling the main area. This time I only saw that man and a white pickup truck parked further back, with no logo visible in the dim light. No other trucks were being directed for this makeshift secondary inspection. Everyone went straight to the official scale without interruption. As I slowed down approaching the entrance, I noticed the electronic panel suspended above the main lane. It indicated normal operation, with no license plate blockage or red warning light. The station's internal radio did not transmit any calls directed to my unit number. The man maintained his steady gesture, pointing to the dark side, avoiding prolonged eye contact. And it was there that the feeling ceased to be strangeness and turned into calculation. I kept the truck at low RPM and partially aligned myself between the main lane and the dark side lane, without making any definite move. He approached my door with his clipboard raised, showing a printed number that he said was my retention code. The format of that number did not follow the pattern that appears in the state system when there is mandatory inspection. I asked which division had issued the order, and he answered too quickly, as if he had rehearsed it beforehand. Even so, he didn't ask for my documents first, he just insisted that I turn off the engine immediately. In the passenger seat, I was still carrying a physical folder with copies of the cargo and the manifest. I slowly pulled out the folder, pretending to look for something just to buy myself a few seconds while I got a better look at my surroundings. He said there was a route discrepancy in my electronic record, which didn't make sense for that direct stretch of I-35. When I mentioned the ELD and the automatic route confirmation, he changed the argument to a possible irregularity in the cargo label. He would not have access to the stamp number without an official consultation of the system. The side exit, he pointed out, led to a space partially surrounded by misaligned cones and dim lighting. The cones were not the same reflective model normally used by the state in that region. In the distance, the white pickup truck remained with its engine apparently running, although its headlights were not on at that moment. There was no fixed inspection structure, no auxiliary scale, and no other truck waiting there. It was basically an improvised courtyard outside the main monitored area. I asked how long that inspection would take, and he replied that it could take hours, depending on the physical analysis of the load. The word hours was said far too early for a simple pre-weighing screening. As he spoke, he took 2 steps back, making space as if he expected me to take the detour on my own. I noticed that the radio attached to the vest was switched off, with no indicator lights on. Still, he continued acting as if he were reporting my every move. It was at that moment that I made the first real decision of the early morning. Without turning off the engine, I pressed the official station's communication button via the main scale's standard channel. The response was just a short noise and then complete silence, with neither confirmation nor denial. He noticed my gesture and asked me to stop any further attempts at contact. That's when I stopped treating it as a normal procedure. I kept the truck stationary at the edge between the illuminated main lane and the dark side entrance, without turning off the engine. He changed his tone of voice, now less formal and more impatient, saying that I was delaying a direct order. No alert appeared on the electronic panel above the scale indicating mandatory retention of my license plate. If that were official, the system would have already registered some visible signage. I asked again what the unit number responsible for the inspection was, and he repeated the same code printed on the clipboard. I discreetly opened the official app on my phone, which was attached to the phone holder, and that number wasn't listed in the state database. He moved closer to the door, glancing quickly inside the cabin as if assessing what I had there. The white pickup truck in the background was repositioned a few meters, aligning better with the entrance to the side patio. He then mentioned possible administrative detention due to documentary inconsistency, abandoning the initial argument of route deviation. This change of justification did not match the confidence he had demonstrated minutes before. No other trucks were being diverted to that makeshift area. All were following the normal flow through the main way station. I wasn't being treated as part of a screening process, but as an isolated target. I looked in the rearview mirror and confirmed that the fixed cameras in the main area were operating under strong lighting. If I were to enter the side courtyard, I would be completely out of the field of vision of those official cameras. He made room with his arm outstretched, waiting for me to make the final decision without questioning anything else. And at that point I understood that the consequences would begin even before I chose the direction. Before I could move the steering wheel, the white pickup truck slowly moved forward and closed off part of the side entrance, as if limiting my option to turn around. The man in the vest raised his hand, urging me to immediately shut off the engine so he could begin the physical inspection of the cargo. No official appeared in the main area of the way station, which continued to operate normally for other trucks. The situation was no longer a matter of administrative uncertainty. It was a direct risk outside the monitored zone. I kept my foot on the brake and aligned the truck a few inches more toward the illuminated main lane. He stated that he could register resistance to the inspection, but he did not show a tablet or active camera. The electronic panel above me continued to indicate normal operation, with no blockage for my license plate. The pickup hesitated for a second, as if expecting me to give way first. Without turning off the engine, I engaged the gear and drove straight to the official weighbridge under full illumination. He shouted something about immediate apprehension, but did not cross into the main monitored lane. I slowly walked across the scale, waiting for any red signal that would confirm actual water retention. The panel showed solid green and no further stop orders were issued. I walked a few meters past the scale and pulled into the official area, still within the field of the fixed cameras. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that neither the man nor the pickup truck moved forward to approach me there. No marked vehicles showed up to reinforce the supposed emergency inspection, and at that moment I was certain that this had never been a state procedure. I remained stationary in the official area for a few minutes, engine running, awaiting any formal approach from an identified officer. No state patrol cars entered the main zone, and no standard uniform approached my cabin. The flow of trucks continued normally, with some receiving legitimate red lights and being directed by clearly identified personnel. Nothing indicated that I was under actual detention or active administrative proceedings. I reopened the official communication channel for the scale, and this time there was a response from an internal operator. I confirmed my unit number and inquired about any special inspection order linked to my license plate. The operator replied that there was no record of any active hold or pre-selection at that time. He also reported that no secondary teams were operating outside the main area that morning. I quickly reported the presence of an individual directing vehicles to a side road that was not officially marked. The operator requested a description of the vest, the support vehicle, and the exact location within the yard. As I was speaking, I noticed in the rearview mirror that the white pickup truck was no longer in its initial spot. The side area appeared empty under the dim lighting. Minutes later, a marked vehicle entered the main courtyard with its discreet lights activated. 2 uniformed officers circled the official area and proceeded towards the aforementioned side. I remained inside the cabin, keeping my distance and awaiting direct instructions. Shortly after, I was formally cleared to continue my journey. I pulled away from the gas station with the engine still at low RPMs, as if any sudden acceleration could attract unnecessary attention. In my rearview mirror, I could only see the white lighting of the official area getting smaller as I returned to I-35. No vehicle followed me up the access ramp, and no alert was registered in the carrier system. Operationally, the incident left no formal mark whatsoever. A few kilometers later, I stopped at a larger gas station already within the planned route and reviewed my digital records again. Timetable intact, route consistent, cargo still sealed exactly as it left the origin. The false number he presented did not exist in any publicly available database. If I had turned off the engine on the dark side of the road, the outcome might have been different. The following morning, I reported what had happened to the fleet supervisor, noting all the times. He confirmed that there was no parallel operation scheduled at that way station during the early morning hours. He also recommended registering the situation as an attempted irregular approach outside of official protocol. There was no further contact regarding the case. I continued driving normally in the following weeks, passing through other gas stations in Texas and neighboring states. Standard procedures, correct uniforms, marked vehicles, everything as expected. Even so, I started noticing details that I had previously ignored, such as cone patterns and camera positions. The road hasn't changed, but my perspective on authority has. Today I'm crossing that same stretch of I-35 without changing my route or schedule. The system works, the scales operate, and the officials follow the visible protocol. But when someone tells me to get out of the main lane before the electronic panel confirms it, I don't obey just because they're wearing a vest. Not every improvised uniform represents the state. If you're enjoying the stories, leave a like and comment on where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always like to see where people are watching from. This type of interaction helps YouTube understand that the video deserves to be recommended to more people, and that makes a real difference in keeping the channel active and continuing to bring new stories like this one. I recognized the license plate even before confirming it was the same car for the 3rd time that week. It's not common to see the same dark sedan in different cities along a long interstate route. The 2nd time I mentally wrote down the numbers, just out of old habit from traveling. By the 3rd time I already knew that this wasn't happening by chance. My name is Caleb Dawson, I'm 38 years old, and I live in Jefferson City, Missouri, near a stretch of road I've driven hundreds of times. I spend most of the month traveling between Kansas City and St. Louis, transporting dry cargo to regional distribution centers. I know every gas station, every exit, and most of the vehicles that usually travel along that route. And that sedan wasn't part of the normal pattern for my route. I had been running a simple route that week, dry cargo leaving Kansas City with partial deliveries in St. Louis and an empty return trip west. Regular schedule, no delays, no unexpected itinerary changes, everything within the standard I've been doing for years in Missouri. Stable weather, moderate traffic, nothing that justified a detour or unplanned stop. It was one of those predictable weeks, where the biggest challenge is usually maintaining the pace and focus. The first time I noticed the sedan was near Boonville, still on I-70, maintaining a steady distance behind me. Nothing aggressive, nothing illegal, just a persistent presence in the rearview mirror for far too many miles. He wouldn't attempt to overtake even when the left lane was clear for long stretches. When I went to get gas, he kept going straight without slowing down. 2 days later, near Warrenton, I saw the same model and color appear again behind my trailer. This time I paid attention to the license plate and confirmed the last 3 digits that I had memorized before. The distance was the same, neither too close to seem threatening nor far enough to disappear easily. When I slightly reduced the speed, it adjusted accordingly, maintaining the exact space, My cargo at that stage was standard, products packaged for retail, nothing of high declared value or sensitive material. There was no apparent reason for an informal escort, much less for private security. I had no recent dispute with a client, nor any registered problem with the shipping company. Still, that car always seemed to appear on the longest, emptiest stretches of the highway. The third time, already near Kingdom City, I didn't need to check the sign immediately. I first noticed the small dent in the left rear bumper and a darker film on the driver's side window. He maintained the same calculated distance while the surrounding traffic naturally varied, and it was there that I stopped considering coincidence as a sufficient explanation. The third time I saw him, I decided to change something simple in my driving pattern without telling anyone. I reduced my speed to 5 miles below the limit for a few minutes, just to observe his reaction in the flow of traffic. The sedan maintained exactly the same distance, neither overtaking nor getting stuck behind due to common distraction. It stopped seeming like the habit of a cautious driver and started sounding like a calculated move. A few kilometers later, I signaled as if I were entering a rarely used rest area in that stretch of road. It was a decision outside my original plan, but neither illegal nor suspicious from an outside perspective. The sedan also signaled, maintained the same trajectory, and entered right behind without visible hesitation. That's when I understood that it wasn't just a geographical coincidence between cities. I didn't park immediately. I just turned all the way around inside the parking area and went straight to the opposite exit. It was a neutral maneuver, something any truck driver would do when they realized they didn't want to stop there. The sedan repeated the entire route, entering, turning around, and exiting back onto the highway. No other vehicle performed the same maneuver at that moment. I returned to I-70, maintaining a constant speed, and observed through the rearview mirror more attentively than before. The car remained there, firmly in the same lane, as if it were stuck to my rhythm. There was no attempt to overtake or aggressive behavior, just consistency. Too much consistency for a road where drivers naturally vary their positions. That's when I considered the most uncomfortable possibility of all. Someone could be recording my stop times, my refueling points, my brakes. There was no visible threat, but there was also no logical justification for that exact repetition. And the problem with silent surveillance is that it doesn't announce its intentions. The next day, I changed my departure time by almost 2 hours, without notifying anyone other than the standard dispatch center. I left before dawn during a break I rarely take in that stretch of Missouri. Traffic was lighter than usual, which would make any replay even more visible. Even so, before crossing Columbia, the sedan reappeared in the right lane a few vehicles behind. This time he didn't immediately fall behind me, but maintained his position 2 lanes ahead for a while. It was a safe enough distance to seem casual, but too constant to be random. When I moved to the left to overtake a slower truck, it adjusted its position a few seconds later. The movement was always reactive, never anticipated. I decided to take a side exit onto a less busy state highway. It was a detour that would add a few minutes to the route, but still within the delivery deadline. The sedan took a few seconds, and then made the same turn, maintaining the standard distance. No other car in that lane turned onto that road at that moment. As we drove through a more rural stretch, without streetlights for several kilometers, I gradually reduced my speed again. He also reduced it, while maintaining the same calculated space, as if he were measuring each of my adjustments. There was no honking, no attempt to overtake, just controlled parking. And it became clear that this was no longer a coincidence of an ordinary route. I decided that I would not confront, accelerate, or provoke any abrupt reaction on that rural road. I maintained a steady pace and continued until I reached a larger gas station near a well-lit urban area. I entered the refueling area under visible cameras and with other trucks parked around me. The sedan drove straight past the entrance without slowing down, and continued down the highway as if it had never been with me. While refueling, I stayed a few extra minutes inside the cabin, observing the main entrance through the side mirror. No immediate response, no cars stopped in the distance, nothing to confirm a clear intention. Even so, the sudden absence brought no relief, only increased the doubt about the pattern. If it were a coincidence, it would have ended there naturally. On the next trip 2 days later, I changed the time again and chose another alternative route to test it out. For much of the journey, I didn't see the sedan, which almost convinced me that I had been exaggerating. But near a cloverleaf interchange before St. Louis, he reappeared in the adjacent lane for a few seconds. It didn't fall behind this time, it just maintained a brief parallel line, and then retreated a few vehicles. I couldn't clearly identify the driver because of the dark tint on the side window. There was no gesture, no attempt at prolonged eye contact, just presence. He exited at the same exit as me, but took the opposite direction at the next intersection without any unusual signaling. It was too simple a move to appear as open persecution. After the fourth sighting, I started recording exact times, locations, and traffic conditions in a notebook separate from my regular cargo log. I didn't mention anything to the shipping company beyond the basics because there was no concrete fact to report as a formal threat. Operationally, nothing had gone wrong, no direct approach, no damage, no infraction. Even so, I started changing small routines that I had maintained for years without realizing it. I swapped predictable rest stops for less frequent ones and avoided repeating the same refueling times. I also reduced the time I spent parked in open areas, keeping the cabin closed and paying constant attention to my surroundings. None of this impacted my deliveries, but it did change how I spent each break on the road. I no longer treated the route as known and neutral territory. For the next 2 weeks, I didn't see the sedan again, which could have ended the story there. But the absence did not erase the previous pattern of reappearance calculated in different cities. Whenever a dark-colored car lingered in my rearview mirror for too long, my attention automatically widened. The habit of relaxed driving on that stretch of road has disappeared. Operationally, I continued to meet deadlines, pass standard inspections, and maintain clean reports. No customers questioned the delays and no state official mentioned any active investigation. The only thing that changed was internal, a constant vigilance that I myself began to exercise over the road. And this doesn't appear in the travel report. Today I still drive along the same route between Kansas City and St. Louis, passing the same exits and gas stations that I already knew by heart. The sedan never again appeared with that clear pattern of repetition between different cities. No official notification emerged, no external explanation was offered for those successive coincidences. On paper, nothing actually happened. But I started paying more attention to signs than before and memorizing details that I'd previously ignored. Vehicles that maintain a constant distance for too long no longer go unnoticed in my rearview mirror. I've changed my schedule a few times since then, even when there was no operational need. Not out of outright fear, but out of calculation. I didn't confront them. I didn't call the police. I didn't file a formal report. There was no direct threat, just a pattern that was too repetitive to be comfortable. The road remains open as always, with varying traffic flow and trucks crossing in both directions. But now I know that constant presence is also a form of pressure. My name is Caleb Dawson. I'm 38 years old and still live in Jefferson City. I continue driving along the same Missouri highways without altering my main route. But whenever a car reappears where it shouldn't, I no longer dismiss it as a simple coincidence. Some things on the road don't need to be right up against your bumper to be too close. The air pressure light started flashing faintly on the dashboard, and it didn't make any sense to me. I had just left the industrial yard in Little Rock after carefully inspecting the truck, as I always do before hitting the road. It wasn't a continuous alarm, it was a slight dip, and then it went back to normal as if someone was testing my attention. When the warning appeared for the second time in less than 5 minutes, I felt that this wasn't just simple wear and tear. I was still inside the industrial perimeter when the warning light flashed for the third time, always with that small, annoying drop. It wasn't a complete pressure failure. It was something that seemed to want to make me doubt the panel itself. The weather was dry, a muggy late afternoon typical of Arkansas, with no sudden temperature changes. Nothing in the initial route justified any variation in that system. The cargo was simple. Pallets of automotive parts leaving a secondary warehouse in Little Rock bound for Memphis. Delivery scheduled for the following morning. Nothing urgent, nothing sensitive, just another routine shipment. I had done a visual inspection before leaving, checking hoses, connections, and initial pressure to meet standards. Everything seemed fine and normal when I left the courtyard. I drove through the first few kilometers maintaining a steady speed, alert to any new fluctuations in the speedometer. The needle dropped 2 points, went back 1, then stabilized as if it were adjusting itself. There was no different noise coming from the airlines or immediate sensation in the pedals. It was too minor a flaw to leave it at that. That's when I briefly pulled over to the wide shoulder before the main highway to visually check it again. I got down, rotated the assembly, pressed the connections with my hand, and didn't feel any obvious leaks. No constant hissing, no air clearly escaping from under the chassis. I returned to the cabin still thinking it might just be an unstable sensor. A few minutes later, as we entered the open highway, the alert returned more frequently. This time the decline took a little longer to stabilize, although it was still not critical. I kept a greater distance from the vehicles ahead and reduced my speed by a few kilometers per hour as a precaution. It was then that I realized that it wasn't simply resolving itself. I decided not to ignore the pattern any longer and started observing the exact frequency of the drops on the dashboard. They weren't random. They seemed to occur after small, stronger vibrations in the asphalt. Every imperfection in the track seemed to trigger a new, short fluctuation in pressure. This doesn't suggest a faulty sensor. It suggests something physical responding to movement. I slowed down even further and turned off the radio to listen for any unusual sounds coming from the vehicle. With the cabin being quieter, I started noticing a very slight breeze at specific times. It wasn't constant, it was brief, almost as if something opened and closed on its own. This type of behavior doesn't happen due to ordinary wear and tear. I thought about continuing to the next large rest stop, but I calculated the distance and thought it was too long to risk. The warning light flashed twice in quick succession, while I mentally analyzed the options. If the pressure suddenly dropped at highway speed, I'd have a bigger problem than just a delivery delay. The decision went from being a technical inconvenience to a matter of control. I chose a nearby exit that led back to a smaller commercial area, still within the city limits. It was a short detour, but with enough space to park and check things out more calmly. As soon as I slowed down to enter the exit, the oscillation became a little more pronounced. It was as if the system reacted precisely when I needed it to be stable the most. I pulled over into a large parking lot next to a closed workshop and slowly turned off the engine. I waited a few seconds before getting off, checking to see if the warning light persisted, even when stopped. The needle slowly stabilized, almost as if nothing had happened, but that was not normal behavior for an integrated system. I went down again with a flashlight in hand and headed straight for the airlines near the rear axle. This time, with the system still loaded, I was able to hear a short hiss when I lightly pressed one of the connections. It wasn't a rupture. It was something almost imperceptible, as if the seal was just loose enough. It didn't look like it had been worn down naturally. The metal valve clamp wasn't completely loose, but it didn't require much force to turn it a few millimeters. I remembered checking that part in the yard hours earlier, and it was secure. There was no recent rust or sign of breakage, just an off-balance adjustment. It was too small a change to happen on its own over just a few kilometers. I used the correct wrench and tightened the connection to the correct limit, testing the pressure again on the panel. The system stabilized immediately, and the warning light stopped flashing as if it had never existed. I waited a few minutes with the engine running to confirm that there were no further fluctuations. Nothing fell again. While putting away the tool, I mentally reviewed the time the truck had been parked in the industrial yard before leaving. There was a short break when I stepped away to deal with paperwork in the office. Access to the parking lot was not completely restricted at that time, and that valve doesn't loosen on its own in silence. I returned to the cabin with the connection now secure, but I didn't start the engine immediately. I sat there for a few seconds, mentally reviewing each step since leaving the warehouse. Nothing had been done hastily. Nothing was left pending in the initial visual inspection. The only variable outside of my control was the amount of time the truck was left alone in the yard. When I restarted the system, it built up pressure steadily and remained constant. No more flickering, no more intermittent blinking like before on the highway. This confirmed that the cause lay precisely in that slightly altered connection, and someone had to touch her for that to happen. I left the parking lot maintaining a reduced speed for the first few kilometers to test it under light vibration. The needle remained steady even when going over uneven surfaces on the asphalt. If it were a structural flaw, it would have reappeared right there. But he didn't come back. The consequences began even before I resumed the normal pace of the trip. It wasn't a significant delay or serious mechanical damage, it was something different. It was the certainty that someone had tampered with my truck without leaving a visible mark. And that weighs more than any late fee. I resumed driving on the highway, maintaining a speed below my usual level, alert to any new fluctuations in the air conditioning system during the first few kilometers. The dashboard remained stable even on more uneven sections, confirming that tightening the valve had resolved the intermittent loss. Operationally, I could still meet the delivery deadline in Memphis without registering a formal delay with the carrier. But the unexpected roadside check completely shattered the controlled, routine feel of that trip. Driving has come to require a level of vigilance that I normally only use in extreme weather conditions. As I drove along the highway, now outside the urban area, I began to mentally review who had access to the yard before I left. The warehouse did not have strict controls on third-party entry at that specific time, only normal employee traffic. My truck was parked out of my sight for a few minutes while I signed documents in the office. Anyone with a simple tool could have adjusted that connection in less than a minute without drawing attention. There was no camera pointed directly at the spot where the set was standing. I didn't mention sabotage immediately in the arrival report. I only described the failure and the adjustment made en route. Without proven structural damage, it would be difficult to sustain a formal accusation against any specific individual at the terminal. Still, I started recording exact stopping times and limiting the time I leave the truck unattended. I also started reviewing critical connections twice before each trip, even when time is short. This doesn't appear on the invoice, but it completely changes the way you work. The shipment was delivered without any problems, and the customer didn't notice anything unusual about the delivery. To an outsider, it was just another trip completed as expected. But the difference between mechanical failure and external intervention became too clear to ignore. A slightly loose valve may not cause an immediate accident, but it creates calculated instability on the road. And instability controlled by someone from the outside is not a technical coincidence. My name is Ryan Whitaker, and I've been driving long enough to know the difference between natural wear and tear and subtle intervention. After that day in Little Rock, I never again left the truck alone in the yard without a final thorough check before leaving. It may seem like excessive zeal to those who don't make a living on the road, but small changes can have big consequences at high speeds. That valve didn't come loose due to normal vibration or a defect in a recently inspected material. It was adjusted by someone who knew exactly how much tightening to avoid looking like obvious sabotage. I continued taking the same route through Arkansas in the following weeks, passing the same industrial warehouses and parking at the same loading points. Externally, nothing has changed. Contracts remain in place, schedules are kept, and routine inspections pass without any further observations. But I started observing who was driving around near my truck while I was dealing with internal paperwork. I started limiting distractions when I'm out of the cabin and checking connections even when I'm tired. The road remains the same, but my margin of confidence has decreased. There was no direct confrontation, no cameras caught anyone tampering with the property, and no formal complaint was filed. The only concrete evidence was that calculated pressure fluctuation that ceased the instant I tightened the correct part. If I had ignored it for a few more kilometers, perhaps the fall would have been greater on a stretch of higher speed. It might not cause an immediate accident, but it would certainly create an unnecessary critical situation. And those who make these kinds of adjustments aren't doing it out of mechanical curiosity. Today I still drive through the same states, reviewing connections with almost obsessive attention before each trip. I learned that not every threat comes with high beams in the rearview mirror or an aggressive horn blaring from the back of the trailer. Some appear as minor technical glitches that insist on seeming like coincidences. And when something that was firm suddenly becomes loose without explanation, I no longer attribute it to chance. Because on the road, what seems like a detail is sometimes a test. If you made it all the way to the end, comment "road" so I know you're still here. Leave a like if this story really kept you watching until the last minute. That tells YouTube this kind of content is worth pushing to more people. And that's how the channel keeps growing, one story at a time.